We moved here to California when I was 7, and soon after my grandfather on my dad's side started a little church in Pomona. My dad was a self-taught guitar player. My mom took piano lessons as a kid. I remember being pretty little and just being kind of entranced by watching what she was doing on the keyboard and stuff. And they were the de facto worship leaders. They called them song leaders back then, but worship leaders for my grandfather's church. It was pretty cool. I got to see what it took to put on a church service, multiple ones too. Back in that day, you were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night at the minimum. I got super excited about music when I discovered the Beatles. My first semester at APU, I was a business major. I was a business major, music minor. Since I wasn't sure, I actually did a 5th year. I got my teaching credential. While this was all happening, though, I was in a specific group called Sound Foundation, and it was taught by one of the music teachers. This particular music teacher, Marlon, that was his name at the school, Marlon Jones, owned a recording studio in Hollywood. We, as a group, as an AP group, went down and did some recording. And I saw a piano player there and watched him intently and thought, I could do that. What do I have to do that? So that was probably the first exact trigger that really kind of just like a freight train pushed me in that direction. I made this deal with him. If you'll teach me engineering, I'll work for you for free. Sweep the floors, I'll do whatever it takes, whatever you want. And so he did, and over the process of 6 months or whatever, I learned enough that I could start doing recording sessions behind the board for him. They would give me the sessions that started at midnight, the people that wanted the lowest rate. He took in 2 more partners, a guy named Bob Summers and Don Perry. Bob Summers is the brother-in-law of Les Paul. I'm there as one of the engineers. Well, somebody, I think Marlon told him, hey, Smitty plays piano. They put me on their next one of their records that we're going to do. They started doing TV and film. And since Bob couldn't read music, he could write it, but he couldn't read it, I started working with Bob, orchestrating some of his music. I would sit next to Bob as the strings and woodwinds and whatever were being recorded. And if there was a question that came from the room, Bob could go, bro, what are they saying bar 15? I'd say it's a C, E, G, A. And I could be his eyes for his own score. Bob needed some help with some composition. He couldn't write it all that quick. So he started handing me some cues. Hey, Smitty, you write this scene here and this scene and this scene. I did some ghostwriting for another composer for a couple of TV shows. There was a successful NBC show called Grizzly Adams, kind of a 2-season hit, and then it quickly took a dive after that. But I wrote the cues, but I didn't get credit. I didn't get royalties on it. Well, Bob was such a kind and generous soul that all those cues that he gave me to write, he gave me full credit. I was in a Christian band also. We're recording, we're touring, and I'd kind of balance it with the TV season. The producer of our band became an amazing mentor, friend of mine, lifelong. And he started bringing me back to Nashville to play on other records that he was producing. So I more and more started getting back to my roots, like with my mom and dad at the little church in Pomona. Commercial music, great. I have no complaints about anybody that does it. Money was great. The projects were fun. I got to go to England a couple times, big orchestras, and hear music I had orchestrated, played by the London, Philharmonic, and recorded by the engineer that had just recorded Star Wars, the original. But it still gives me chills to think that I could do something that had eternal value. So it wasn't a struggle to switch. So from probably 83 on, I would get contracted just to play on Christian records. Then Stan Endicott hired me to play on a project he was producing for Maranatha Music. I started to play keyboards on just about everything that he did for Maranatha Music. That evolves into me producing. The Jesus movement, the Jesus explosion was unbelievable. The amount of kids that were turning their lives over to Christ was just mind-boggling. All these hippies are getting saved, and churches, they're getting inundated, especially Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. That's where all this with Chuck Smith, and he threw his arms wide open and took them in. And accepted them for who they were, accepted their music. What flows out of an artist is what they're living. But these people they're saved. The good just starts pouring out of them in songs. Then they start touring. They start making records. All of a sudden, out of this little church called Calvary Chapel in Santa Ana, it becomes a record company and a record label with many artists, which eventually becomes Maranatha Music. I just think of times during sessions when God moved and tears came. They had kind of a house band. I was in the house band in the early 90s. Well, I did that for 12 years, and I think it was maybe 20 events a year. I used to tell the guys in the band, I said, dudes, we're going to be sitting in rockers someday when we're 95, and we'll all be thinking about this. We're creating some memories here that are unbelievable. Yeah, DC was on the mall there. As we were driving to the event, we were in these big buses, and somebody started singing Amazing Grace on that bus. So, I'm seeing Jack Hayford and Wellington Boone and Coach McCartney and all our geeky guys on the worship team, and there's that was a kind of a private moment that we all shared. Then later in the day, we were at the steps of the Capitol. Basically, one of the pieces of the event, they gave everybody that came a Bible. It was getting maybe 4 o'clock-ish, 5 o'clock. Sun was starting to go down. I can't remember if it was one of the speakers. It might have been one of our guys said, "Hey guys, raise your Bible up." And they had these shiny covers on them, and they started shaking them. And so from my vantage point, I'm looking, and the sun is catching the reflection of all those Bibles. It was like diamonds looking down through that mall there. Anyway, that was one of my just personal special moments that I thought that, man, this is so beautiful. Gina was the head of the music department here, Celebration Arts. One of her friends that she had met was a guy named Terry Butler, who was and still is the music pastor at the Vineyard in Pomona. And Terry, coincidentally, was he was the other keyboard player in that Christian rock band in the 80s. So she asked Terry, does he know anybody? He said, yeah, I know Smitty, blah, blah, blah. So I came and played here at Hillside maybe twice. 2 months later, they offered me a part-time job here. At that particular time, Christy had gone back to school. We had Sam, who was a little guy. I'd been freelance musician my whole life. To have something a little more consistent and be with Sam, enable Christy to, go back to school, all that kind of stuff, is just perfect timing. I went from decades of making music for the church to now I was the guy getting to use the music that others were making in the church. Before we came up to this plot of land that now the worship center's on, and each of us had a stake, and we drove a stake into that rocky dirt, that represented future lives. Just the special moments we had downstairs in it's now the community center. Wow. And then here's this building, the services that have gone on here, the baptisms are phenomenal. Every time there's a baptism, I think that 42-year-old thread and the George Leitners of the in that tapestry, all the early starters and everything, and the Easters and Christmases and the baptisms, every one of them are special. I've always been a guy that loves teams, but this is the best team that I could ever be on. And to not have that on a regular basis, that'll be hard. I'm not retiring to just stop working. I'm retiring from the have-tos and to the want-tos. I've always desired to be a lifelong learner. I've tried never to get comfortable. What's next? What can I find that's out now that still resonates with me? I've always wanted to end well. So I think even though this is an ending for Hillside, I still have room to go and keep going, and that's still my goal, to end well, end the best I can.